everybody. My name is Dave Docherty. I was a professor at the University of Victoria for over 40 years before retiring, and I taught in the School of Exercise Science, Physical and Health Education, and my particular field of study was exercise science. So it's really looking at the way the body responds to exercise from different kinds of training programs. And I've been asked to talk to you today a little bit about preparing for the Camino walk, and what you can do in terms of preparing for the walk, and also what you can do during the walk in order to make this more successful and as pleasant an experience as possible. So I've actually broken this presentation down into what I would consider to be, if we're going to engage in physical activity, either exercising to develop fitness or actually embarking on some kind of activity like a walk, then what should you do in terms of preparing the body for that kind of activity? And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So, one of the distinctions I'm going to be making here is warming up and preparing the body to be physically active. And we do use the term warm up because it should be interpreted literally. What we're trying to do in a warm up is to actually increase the body temperature so that the muscles and the joints are more ready to engage in the kind of physical demands that you're actually going to be placing on them, either if you're training or even if you're going to exercise such as a long walk. So warm up is getting the body temperature elevated, which means we need to engage in some kind of large motor activity that will generate the heat and maybe even break into a light sweat. And if we do that, we know the muscles are being well prepared, because warm muscles and joints respond much better than when those things are not at an elevated temperature. And the other thing about warming up, and particularly in the joints, is that as we begin to move joints, then all the lining of the joints releases an oil, or almost like a lubricant, that will help those joints move better. So even if joints feel stiff when we begin to start to moving, the more we move them, the more we release that fluid, and the easier it is on the joints. And warm muscle will contract and work much better than cold muscle. So warm-up is kind of important. So I want to talk a little bit about warm-up, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can further prepare the muscle to engage in physical activity. So I'm going to use the poles here because I would think that, I'm a great believer in using these Nordic poles in terms of walking for a number of reasons. One, it certainly engages a lot more musculature in the body, and that's been shown by a number of different studies that have been done. And of course, it does facilitate balance, and particularly if you're walking on uneven ground. So this kind of poling I'm just going to be doing here is just to generate a little body temperature. And one of the best ways to do that is just to walk. So we can walk on the spot. We can start with very low elevation of the knees, and gradually as things begin to warm up, we can actually begin to expand and increase the amplitude of movement. So any kind of activity you want to do, even a little bit of jogging on the spot, you can use these poles just to help get that body temperature up a little bit. And you can go a little bit faster as you get a little bit warmer. We can even do some little kicks here, little kicks forward, and we can even do little kicks sideways, just to get that body temperature up. We can do a little bit of stepping forward and a little bit of stepping back. We can do step back and we can step forward, and then we can go back to high knees. We can even move our legs to the side a little bit. So we stretch those muscles out a little bit before we start engaging in what I'm going to call dynamic stretching. So here we go. So you can do this for 4 or 5 minutes. I'm already beginning to feel a little bit warm now, and my body's getting temperature up, which is good. All right, so there we go. And even starting to breathe a little heavy. So that can be done on the spot. It can be done in a small area, anywhere you kind of like to do that. Now, once we've got the body temperature up a little bit, we can do things that we call dynamic stretching. One of the things we don't recommend before getting in any kind of exercise is doing what we call static stretching. So we're going to talk a little bit about dynamic stretching, which in a way is just taking the muscle through a full range of motion. So in this case, I could just be lifting my knee up and a little bit higher each time, taking that limb through a little bigger range of motion. And then I can go to the other leg, and I can do that. So lifting that up and down and up and down. Now, one of the neat things that I like to do in terms of dynamic stretching is swings, leg swings. So in this case, I'm just going to swing my leg forward and pull it back. And the poles are very good for this because, they'll help me balance while I'm doing these very easy dynamic stretches. So little knee up in front, little leg straight at the back. Excellent. All right. And then, of course, what we do on one side, then we also have to do on the other. So again, using these poles has a little bit of a balance. I can come up in the front, swing it at the back. Now, this is really stretching out through the glutes and through the hamstrings quite nicely. So I'm going to now think a little bit about stretching these hamstrings. So rather than bending my knee coming front, I'm just going to kick it forward on the front. Then I'm going to pull my foot up at the back. So swinging it forward. When I do this, I can brush the floor very, very gently. So I'm getting these muscles nicely stretched out, as well as even heating them up a little bit more. So I do it one leg, and now I was going to do it the other leg. So coming up in front, and then pulling it up a little bit behind. So really working on the hamstrings. Now I'm going to go a little bit bigger amplitude here. So I'm going to try and get that front leg coming a little higher. And the leg is straight, and the toes are pointing up towards the sky. Okay, so basically 10 to 12 times swinging is probably enough to get these muscles stretched out and ready to start to do a little bit more robust exercise. Now, that's getting the hamstrings quite well. But, we have these muscles on the front of the leg, the quads, so we need to think a little bit about stretching them. One of the easiest ways of doing that is to actually pull our heel up towards our bottom. So I'm just going to work one leg to start with and trying to get that heel closer to my bottom each time I pull it up behind. Right? So again, 10 to 12 times, one leg, and then switching legs, pulling it up. Again, I can do this with or without the poles, and I'm going to talk a little bit later on about balance. So all these activities I'm doing here could be done with some kind of support, or, basically you can do all these exercises really, without support, which really does force you to work a little bit more on your balance, and you can do them. So we can work on balance as well as dynamic flexibility. Okay, well, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel a bit stretched and a bit warmed up by now. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is, I thought about quads, hamstrings, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about Achilles. So we're talking about the foot here. And I think we've all done these nice Achilles stretches where we push forward with the back leg straight and the heel on the ground. And again, using the poles, which will help me get a little bit further forward and slightly more of a stretch on that. Now, there's two ways of stretching out the Achilles. One is keeping the leg straight. The other one is to push the knee down towards the ground. Now, again, both times the heel stays on the floor. So I push straight, then I come back. And you'll notice I'm not holding any of these stretches because I'm preparing the body for activity. And we don't do that best by holding the stretch. So again, I've done one leg so I can switch sides. And again, back leg straight, back leg bent, heel stays on the ground all of the time. Pushing back, sitting back, coming forward, sitting back, and coming forward. Okay, so that's a little bit of dynamic stretching right now, right? So we're going to talk a little bit now about moving to the second part of this, which is talking about how we prepare the muscles for prolonged and repeated activity. And certainly one of the best ways we can do that is to increase the strength. So I'm going to talk in particular about increasing the strength initially of the quadriceps, and then I'll spend a little time talking about the hamstrings and finish up talking a little bit about the calf muscles. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm not going to be using the poles. I'm going to put the poles down to the side, but I am going to engage a chair. Now, you can do these exercises with or without the chair. Now, I kind of like the chair for a number of reasons. One, it helps me to go through a full range of motion rather than kind of cheat it. So it gives me a physical point to work towards. And of course, one of the best ways of developing leg strength is to actually just do what is a good old squat, body weight squat. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you need to watch out for when you do some of these exercises. So Normally, if we're thinking about maximizing the quads and involving the front leg muscles as much as we can, then we have our legs apart. We can't have them together. We can actually put them apart. Either way, we're still going to do something very, very similar. So if you want a variation, you can vary the width that you're standing. But for most normal squats, we want the feet shoulder width apart. And again, to engage more quads, we actually turn the toes slightly out. So we can have sometimes the feet parallel, but for most of the engagement of the quads, we slightly toe out. And that means when we're doing them, we have to make sure our knees don't collapse in, but our knees track over our toes. Now, basically a squat is very similar to just getting out of a chair and sitting back down again. But, we don't use our arms. Now, we can use our arms in various ways to make this easier or harder. I'm just going to use a very simple way of doing this, and then you can adapt it. There's lots of stuff that you can access online, that will show you 1,000 different kinds of squats and lunges to strengthen these muscles. But we're just going to do a simple squat. So here we go here, and I'm going to put my hands in front, and I'm just going to come out of the chair, and I'm going to try and keep looking at the camera. So if you're doing this, you want to basically always keep your head up and your chin out, and you want to keep the lower back straight. And as I go down, I can just go down very slowly. I can just sit in the chair for a minute, and then bang, I can come back up again. As I'm going up and down, I'm trying to make sure that my knees are staying out rather than collapsing in as I go down, which is oftentimes something that happens. So keep those knees out. Now the question is always, well, how many of these should I do? And the question is, well, anywhere between 50 and 20 repetitions is probably developing strength. If we get above that, we're working on endurance. So if we're getting that to 20 repetitions, we're probably doing pretty well. And if we do that 3 times, what's is called 3 sets, then you've got a pretty good workout developing strength of the quads. And I'll show you a few things that you can do to make that a little harder, but let me just finish off talking a little bit about this exercise, and any exercise for that matter. Now you may have noticed that I'm actually going slow on the way up, and I'm going slow on the way down. Now when I'm going slow on the way up, I'm using the same quad muscles, but as I do that, the muscle is actually shortening, right? Now as I go down, I'm using the same muscle, it's under tension, but this time I'm putting tension on it as it lengthens. So it's very important to develop strength in both ways. One is the muscle shortens, but the other one is as it lengthens. That's particularly true if we're walking and doing a lot of hilly terrain and we're going downhill. Because when you're going downhill, it puts a lot of eccentric strength on these muscles, particularly the quads, and you have to make sure that they're conditioned in that way in which you're going to be challenging them. So please remember, slow is better than fast when it comes to developing muscle strength, and particularly in terms of preparing that lengthening of the muscle. So when it shortens, we call that concentric contraction. When the muscle is under tension and it lengthens, we call that eccentric contraction. So working the muscle in both directions slowly will increase strength as the muscle shortens and as it lengthens, both of which are very, very important. Now, the other way you can make this a little harder is not by sitting all the way, but just by lightly touching the chair. So I can come up out of the chair, I can go very down. As soon as I feel the chair, I come back up. And what that does, it actually keeps those quads under tension the whole time, right? As soon as I sit, the tension goes off and I lose some of that training effect. So to make it a little harder, then you can do those up and downs without a full sit. Okay, that's kind of the first exercise that I would kind of recommend. There are many others that we can develop strength of the quads, but that is a pretty simple one to do. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about adding resistance here. And we can do that by just adding load. Now, load is usually added by using free weights. So we can have these, what we call dumbbells. We can put one in each hand, maybe 5 or 10 pound, and that adds load to what we're doing. So we're now not just lifting our body weight, but our body weight plus whatever we're holding. The other way and simple way of doing it is to just purchase a TheraBand. Now these things can be purchased for anywhere between $10 and $12, and you'll notice that I actually have probably just over 2 meters of length, because what I like to do is to put these underneath the feet. So now when I'm standing up, I can actually add resistance by holding the band fairly tight, coming out of the chair, keeping my arms straight, and now I'm having to work against the tension of the band. And remember again, as I go down, I'm going down fairly slowly until I touch the chair, and then I'm going to be coming back up again, all right? So again, very simple way of adding load to increase the strength. So if you can do 15 to 20 squats 3 times with a little break between, then you probably could add a bit of load, which will increase the strength. Now, the other comment I'll make about strength is that a stronger muscle also has more endurance, as long as the load we put on it stays the same, right? And of course, the load is our body weight, particularly when we're walking, maybe with a bit of added weight with a backpack. But if we increase strength, we actually help our endurance. So strength is simpler to do rather than endurance. The walking part of it you'll probably get by doing longer walks. But in terms of developing the muscle and preparing it, then developing the strength will help it recover from a day-to-day basis because it won't break down as much, but it will also help the endurance of the muscle during any kind of activity. Now, I've spoken a little bit about these muscles on the thigh, which are very important when we're walking. But again, I'm going to talk a little bit about hamstrings, which are a little bit trickier in terms of developing, particularly using body weight. So I'm going to do the band here basically for our hamstrings. And in this one, I'm going to go on a slight angle here because there's slight differences in terms of doing a regular squat, which would be there, and doing a deadlift. Now, a deadlift drops the hips a little bit lower than the height. When we're doing basically a squat, we're going down to thighs parallel to the ground. When we want to do a deadlift, we want to push the weight a little bit further back, and then we want to come down here, and that will start to really load the hamstring and glute muscles. So it's hips back, drop the hips down as close to the calf as you can, and then come back up and then push the hips forward. So the big difference here is going a little lower and making sure that that hip is going back before I lower down. And then when I come up, I engage it by pushing it forward. And then I can feel my glutes and hamstrings really being involved in that kind of an exercise. Now, we probably need to explain why we want to actually exercise both the quads and the hamstrings. So we talk about balance across a muscle joint. So we need to try to make sure we don't strengthen one muscle at the expense of the other. So one becomes very strong, but the other is not very, very strong at all. So there's a discrepancy between their ability in regards to strength. So when I kind of do exercises for upper body or lower body, I always try to work on muscles both sides of the joint. So when working the quads, that's the front of the leg, we have to also make sure we do exercises that also strengthen the glutes and the hamstrings. For most of us, our quads are usually much, much stronger than our hamstrings. That's kind of a given because the way we live our lives. Usually when we're walking around, getting in and out of chairs, it's the quads that tend to be doing the majority of the work and not the hamstrings. And it's even true of athletes. And the theory is that a lot of times when athletes tear hamstrings, which they usually do, it's because the quads are so much stronger than the hamstrings, and when the hamstrings go to resist that, they don't have enough strength. So let's try and make sure that if you work the quads, you also work the hamstrings. A simple way of exercising the hamstrings and strengthening them, and I'll show you with the bands in a minute, but without the bands, is just basically behind a chair. Now, anytime we lift the leg up and backwards, if you put your hand on your bum, you can actually feel that muscle tighten up. And we can do that either by keeping the leg straight, or we can actually do it by bending the leg, all right? So either way, we engage particularly the glutes and some of the hamstrings. So this simple exercise of lifting our leg up behind us as high as we can, but not making sure we don't pinch our back, is a good way of actually developing that hamstring strength and that glute strength. And of course, what we do with one leg, then we have to do with the other. So we talk about symmetry in two ways. One is both sides of a joint, but then we also have to think about the left and the right side of the body. So we want to make sure we develop these things at the same time so we don't start getting asymmetries in terms of muscular strength. Now, the other simple way of doing this as well if you don't want to tie this or you want to buy a little band, then the way we can do it is just simply by wrapping the band around our thighs, putting the band on the back of the chair, and now instead of just lifting the leg and using leg weight, we can now actually be working against the band and again engaging those glutes and those hamstrings as we do this straight leg lift behind. And again, repetitions of anywhere between 15 and 20 will start to help us develop strength. And I can make that band easier, or I can make it harder, basically by just adding it up and tightening it. So now I can really feel the resistance on that. So there's some simple exercises to help develop quad strength and hamstring strength and glute strength, which I think is good preparation if you're going to engage in any long type of activity, such as walking for, basically 4 or 5 or even longer days. Now, the last little exercise I'm going to show you here is related to the calf, right? So again, you can think about walking up hills, and obviously we just don't engage the quads and the hamstrings and the glutes, but we engage these muscles at the back of the leg, and they are, of course, the calf muscles. And the easiest way of doing that is simply to do toe raises. So I can just do simple toe raises behind a chair of pushing up on my toes and lowering down, and again up slowly, down slowly, up slowly, down slowly, up slowly, down slowly. Now, if I want to make that a bit more challenging, then instead of using 2 feet at the same time, I can just use 1 foot. So I can just go to 1 foot, the other foot is in the air, and now I'm actually pushing down and almost doubling the load that I was doing using my both feet at the same time. And of course, what I do on one side, then I should also make sure that I'm doing on the other side. So little heel off, slow down, heel off, slow down. Okay, now that's pretty much got a little bit of the quads, hamstrings, glutes, and we've now got calves. So we've really addressed most of the important muscles in the lower body that you're going to be engaging when you're doing walking and a lot of other kinds of locomotor activities. The last thing I want to talk a little bit about is balance, because again, balance for anybody doing anything, and particularly as we get a bit older, becomes very important. The last thing we want to do is to fall. So I'm going to focus a little bit on balance activities here to try to improve our balance that hopefully will then transfer to helping us walk and not lose any kind of mobility because we fall. So the simplest way of doing this is, again, you can have a chair alongside you, and this is kind of a mental and it could be a physical crutch for you, but it's really just standing on one leg. And standing on one leg and then seeing if we can actually let go and looking straight ahead rather than down at the ground. And then if we kind of feel that body is moving around, then that's good, because it means that we're having to engage the muscles that keep us in balance. Of course, another simple activity, of course, we have to do it on the other side. So it's not good doing it on one side. We also need to do it on the other side. Now, the one thing we find about balance is that a lot of people can do that. I can stand on one leg, it's not a problem. But when we start to move things around, then we're challenging it again, because the body weight and the center of gravity is shifting, our focus is shifting, and it becomes a lot harder when we're coming knee up, knee out, knee front, and knee down. So again, you can challenge yourself not just by lifting the foot up, by moving it around in different places, seeing how long you can stay there, and that actually is a good way to improve our balance. And of course, what we do on one leg, then we'd also want to do on the other side. So simple activities to improve balance and get all those muscles required for balance engaging, and we're challenging a little bit more by not just doing the same static stand. Now, another simple way of doing this is heel toe, and not only is this good in terms of balance, but probably could be good if you happen to get pulled over while you're driving. So it's going to be almost a sobriety test, all right? So it's 1 foot in front of the other, again looking straight ahead, not looking down at your feet, and just trying to walk a straight line, heel to toe, heel to toe. Then of course what goes forward, basically we can take back, so just making sure that we feel that toe is up against the heel, and both feet are in line, and we're coming back. So again, pretty simple activity in terms of helping our balance. And of course, one that if you do yoga, most of you are very familiar with doing this kind of yoga exercise, which is called the tree, where we actually just place the foot on the inside of the thigh, and then we can put our hands in front, and we can hold them here, or you can put them above your head, you can move them around, and again, excellent balance exercise. So, continuing talking about the importance of balance, a few more exercises and activities that will help us to develop our balance. And one is, again, instead of lifting the leg straight in front, we can actually lift it behind and we can reach down to the ground. Now again, I'm holding onto the chair very lightly, but if you're really good, you can do these exercises without holding onto the chair. So again, try not to let the head drop down. Try to keep the head neutral, looking straight down to the ground. See if you can hold that for 2 to 3 seconds, bring it back up, and then repeat it the other side. Certainly one of the things we do know about balance is that one of the things that helps balance is leg strength. And a lot of the reasons why a lot of people have poor balance or fall is lack of leg strength. So these exercises that we were doing before will actually help balance as well as these specific balance activities. Now, an exercise that will combine both strength and balance are lunges. All right, so a lunge is typically when we step forward into an exercise here, we lower down, and then we push back to come back up. So we can step forward as far as we can, lower down, again, looking ahead, push off the front leg, and come back up. Now, what we can do is to almost replicate a fall by tilting forward. So we can tilt forward, catch, and then push our foot back. Fall forward, catch, push back. So this is good for regaining balance when we perhaps have lost it, but it's also a very good strength exercise, particularly if we take that front lunge a little bit lower. And again, what we do on one side, then of course we should do on the other side, all right? So this idea of tilt, tilt, fall, catch, push back. Tilt, tilt, fall, catch, push back. And of course, what we do forwards, we can actually do sideways. So we can tilt sideways, catch here, and then push back up. Tilt side, catch, and push. Again, we can repeat these activities anywhere between 10, 15, maybe up to 20 times, and we develop strength as well as our ability to catch our balance in case we do, in fact, trip and fall. So that reaction, what, is kind of important. Whoosh! So this time we don't particularly want to go slowly because we're actually catching ourselves as potentially we may be falling. And again, we can also do these lunges going backwards, but again, not so much for developing balance, but more for developing hamstring and to develop basically glute strength as well. So the last part of this whole thing would be the cooling down, or what we do when we finish the activity, or in your case, maybe after you've finished a long walk for the day. It's kind of important to help recovery so that the next day you're going to be well recovered to carry on the challenges that lay ahead. And one of the ways that we can do this is by making sure that you cool down properly. Now, this is where slow stretching does in fact become a useful technique, because slow stretching has been found to facilitate recovery, help those muscles get back to the nice length, and the next day you should be ready to go by the warm-up and then engage in the kind of activities we talked about before. Now, when we're looking at stretching, we can now talk about held or static stretching. So the time to do static stretching is at the end of the activity, not before. Static stretching is not a good way to prepare, but it's actually an effective way to recover. And again, there's a number of ways that you can do that. And the 2 areas that we probably need to stretch, or 3 in fact, after we've done a long walk, again, the quads and the hamstrings, and of course the calves. So I think most of us know nice hamstring stretches can be done simply by having a chair, putting our leg on the chair, keeping it straight, and now rotating actually at the hip and then coming forward with our chest down towards our thigh. And even if I only go a short way, I can start to feel that stretch on my hamstring and through my glutes and along the back of my leg. And then toe up and I can go a little bit further. Now these held stretches, you could hold anywhere between 20 and 30 seconds, even longer. because this does help to really help the muscle recover, but it will also help you with flexibility. So if we want to improve flexibility, we can do these static stretches. So this is just reaching forward, making sure I go through the full range. Now the muscle is going to start to want to kind of contract, so you just hold it in that position, you exhale very gently, and then you can go down a little bit further, you hold it in the new position, exhale, and you can go down a little bit further, and that way I'm really stretching that muscle out. And of course, what I do on one side, I need to do on the other. So I can put my foot up, and again, I can go down. So there are very simple ways of stretching out those hamstrings. I can even do that standing by just putting one foot in front and then reaching down and reaching down and reaching down, and again holding for anywhere between 20 and 30 seconds. Pretty good way of stretching out the hamstrings and the glutes. Of course, the ones that are going to get fairly tight are the quadriceps, because still they'll probably take most of the of the demands of long walking, particularly if you're coming down a lot of steep terrain. And the easiest way of stretching the quadriceps, again, we can use a chair, we can put one foot up behind the chair, and again we can push our hip forward, and I can feel that stretch right down my quadricep muscle. And again, I hold that. If I want to go a little bit further, I can lean back a little bit further, push my hips a bit further forward, and I can feel that stretch right down my quadricep muscles. I can do similar things sitting. If you feel exhausted at the end of a long walk, you go, oh, I just want to have a sip and a cup of tea or something. Then I can sit towards the end of the chair. I can put one foot leg straight, and I can lean forward. And again, I can feel that stretch on my hamstrings very nicely. I can do the other side, again, holding for anywhere between 20 and 30 seconds. Then if I want to stretch my quads, I can sit partly on the side of the chair, put one foot behind, and lean back. And again, I can feel that nice stretch in my quads. So, doing these stretches at the end of a long day, you're going to find the next day you're going to be much more ready to actually start than you would if you didn't do these stretches at the end. And of course, the last one would be the calves and the Achilles tendon, which may have tightened up. So again, using a wall, as most runners do. If you ever see runners when they finish the run, they usually stretch the calves out by trying to push the building down. So this time we're just stepping back here, and again, before when we did these same stretches, we actually didn't hold them. But now we're doing static stretching, so we do hold them. So again, holding forward, pushing that heel down towards the ground, pushing the hips towards the chair, stretching out that particular calf muscle. And again, when we stretch it with the legs straight, we can stretch it slightly differently by then bending the knee. So a very simple stretch first of keeping the legs straight, 20, 30 seconds, and then bending the knee, keeping the heel on the ground, pushing the knee down towards the ground, and holding that for a similar time period. There you go. So, in about half an hour, just sharing a few things about what you can do to prepare, either for activity, like preparing, strengthening in order to go on the trip, but also when you're on the trip or you're on the walk, what you can do the day of, and particularly when you finish the walk, to help you recover for the next day. So thank you very much. I hope you found that somewhat helpful, and best wishes for a very successful hike and walk.